how we can strengthen their input in all these efforts to make a better world and make governance work. So Raoul is a professor in evolutionary biology, and his article in the book is a real remarkable article. You really have to read it to understand what I say. I cannot explain, but I'm very happy that Raoul is here in our midst, and that Raoul can tell us from his position in Argentina what is happening there and why it's important that we work together on a book like this and on promoting right livelihood. Raoul, the floor is yours.
Okay. First of all, good morning here. There is later. You can read, listen me, okay? I don't know if you are listening me without problems.
Sorry.
Hello, Hans.
Can you hear what he said?
Yes, Raoul, we can hear you loud and clear.
Is okay?
Yeah, very okay, Raoul.
Ah, fine.
And the image.
We are now. I am now here in Argentina. Now in Cordoba is the morning. It's very early in the morning. You know, my contribution to the book. The book is a very good news for not only for the people linked with the Earth Trusteeship, but I think it's a good news for everybody, because I think that the spirit of change and innovation for change are contained inside the book, and that's for me, and I think for a lot of people, it's really a good news. And congratulations to Hans, because it was a hard work to do this book. My contribution is a small contribution, but it's a contribution that links two different scenarios. In one side, my academic work, and in the other side is the fights in the field. That's academy and fight in the fields, but particularly this is part of a book that I'm writing, trying to explain why Homo sapiens, our species, is being realistic, a failed species if Homo sapiens don't change the mainstream criteria, the mainstream attitudes and the mainstream behaviors that humans are accomplishing in the biosphere. Remember that in our planet, the planet is not in danger because the planet is very big. The problem is the biosphere, which is a very thin layer of no more than 20 kilometers. And in this layer is living all our biodiversity and all the humanity, with more than 8,000 million people. That's our book is the chapter that we sent the book is human behavior, leaders with excess of power and risk of nuclear war. You know, we were very worried about the situation that is happening in the world, and particularly in Europe, with the war between Ukraine and Russia. But it was only an excuse to try to explain why one of the worst problems that humanity faces is that we have a lot of people having in excess power. People having in excess power. Your travel to the places where people is suffering, where the people don't have land, don't have places for obtaining their food. This is an extreme. This is the humanity in the extreme that is suffering, and these people has no power at all. They don't have power. They cannot do nothing. They cannot make pressure. They are surviving. But meanwhile, this big quantity of people suffering around the world try to survive. There is people having too much power, and the people having too much power, like Putin in Russia, like Zelensky in Ukraine, or people in the NATO, or even the prime ministers and presidents in different countries. Meanwhile, they have a lot of power. You have a big, the biggest quantity of people around the world don't have power. And the problem is that people having too much power take decision in most of the case without social control. And this is a tragedy because sometimes they are elected, sometimes they are dictatorships. But the reality is that they take decisions that influence all humanity in some cases. In some cases is the population in a country. In some places is only the people living in a city. But these people having too much power is really a problem for humanity, particularly when this excess of power is out of control. And for the first time in humanity, we are part of this kind of experiment, having people that take extreme and very serious decisions without social control. If you think in the Bill Gates, if you think, for example, in all these people having as many money as a country, they take decisions that affect us. And that's this chapter included in the book. Of course, this is a lot of issues, but one of the central issues is to underline that one of the problems that we face is these people having more and more power and societies having less and less control in this kind of big power. And this is summarizing, it's more complex, but I think that we try to explain how we work, how humanity is quite different from the strategy developed by the biodiversity. When you are walking in a forest, when you are walking in an area of high biodiversity, each species with their population, they develop a strategy of living based in their genetical code. That means that most of the species in nature, they display behaviors that are contained in their genes, and they are predictable. Most of the species in a complex ecosystem, each of these species have the same and maintain the same behavior over generations because the behavior is mostly contained in genes. And Homo sapiens, since 200,000 years ago, started a new experiment because each generation, we are now the 14,000 generation in the surface, in the biosphere. Each generation, each human generation has more information than the previous one. What means? This means that each generation has more information, and this information create new behaviors. Our ecological niche have been growing and growing as the total amount of information. For example, in terms of kilocalories, one person in the forest of Djibouti, where I work with the indigenous Bia people, they spent 3,000 kilocalories per person per day.
Raoul, may
Yes.
I interrupt you? Sorry. Thank you so much for your introduction. I'm sure people will, with even more interest, read your article now. I think we have to, because we have a little bit delay, so if you don't mind, we stop here and we move to the other online resource person, also an author of the book. Henri, is it okay, Raoul, or do you have a final remark to make before we switch to the other author?
Yes. I think that in the chapter of we included in the work, there is not solely this issue trying to underline the risk for humanity of having people with a lot of power, but also try to underline that we are making a wrong strategy, and finally that we don't have solely or only the global climate change. This is one of the problems, but one of the problems is also biodiversity, but particularly the strategy developed by humans for surviving. I think this is the final message, but for having more information, you need to read the book.
Okay, thank you, Raoul. This is really a fantastic introduction to our evening also. You're the first online speaker, and you're the Livelihood Laureate. So thank you so much for being with us. And I would like now to switch to another author. He's from the Netherlands. Henri Mentink is his name. And he is well known in the Netherlands and more globally also because of his wheelbarrow walk. Henri, are you available? Are you ready? Switch to Henri now?
Yes, good evening, afternoon. I don't know what the time is there.
Yeah, but, we are in the evening. We have dinner time.
Dinner time now. Have a nice dinner, but here I am, yes, from Holland. You can hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well, Henri. Please tell us why you started this wheelbarrow walk and what happened after this individual initiative. Given all the attention people gave you and the support you met while wheelbarrowing from Netherlands to Paris, why did you do that? What is the symbolic meaning of it?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I try to keep it short in 5 or 10 minutes, if it's okay. My name is Henri Mentink. For about 30 years, I'm entrepreneur in Holland, setting up new businesses with the idea, why do you set up a company and sell it? So my first thought, why do we sell companies? Because when you sell a company, you become rich, but how about the other employees? And the same deal with the same idea, I started a big company and I gave it away. And after that, it had a big success. So it helps to make it a profitable company, but profitable for the community, for the relations. And 9 years ago, I got the idea I have to do the same with soil, with the land we live on. Heritage list, you have to go to the UNESCO. And I thought, why not put the whole planet Earth on the World Heritage List? So that was a very simple idea. And I thought, if I want to go to the UNESCO, I also have to give an example. So the first action I did was giving my land underneath my veerhuis. That's a big house with a garden and a little food forest. I offered that, I gave it to a foundation who takes care of land, but also has written down they will never sell it again. Preserving it for all the next generations. So that was the first action I did a few years ago. It was quite successful. For the notary, it was a new chapter. We had to talk about a year about how to do it, because legally it's a total new concept. But we managed it, so it is possible. And then after succeeding with that idea, last year I thought I have to go to the UNESCO and tell them about this. But to make it more real, I thought I go with a wheelbarrow from my hometown in Holland in 45 days to Paris and to the UNESCO. And the UNESCO said, and I was very surprised, they said the whole Earth on the World Heritage List, that is not possible, but it is a good idea. So now we are starting to work out what is a good idea. And so next year and the year after, we will walk again to the UNESCO and more step by step work out that idea. It's interesting to tell that the first wheelbarrow walk last year, every day, it was 45 days, we went to a place on the way, a nice biological farm or a food forest or an artist or a community living village, to visit them and also ask the media to come on every 45 places. So it was in the media a big success. It was in Belgium. Walking with a wheelbarrow is a simple idea. A wheelbarrow is very close to the earth, and it gives a new type of positive feeling. And I think that also helps and bring a lot of positivity in the world around something new, something hopeful. And with that message, we were also invited by the cabinet of Frans Timmermans of the European Union. So they invited us, so we also could do our story to the European Union, because Brussels was exactly on my road from my hometown Varik to Paris. So that's very in a short way. And I only have to add that when you do it in this new way, you also have to develop a new form of ownership. The ownership at this moment is ruled by money. Let me say, talk with the steward and the community around that piece of land to talk about together what are we going to do with that piece of land for this and also for the next generation. So it's a way of connecting people and communities more directly to the land, because there's no money issue anymore. So I think that can be a hopeful message for the future. And I would invite you all around the world listening to also start walking with a wheelbarrow and tell me or do it via Hans where you are starting to walk, and then we can bring it in the news. We have started recently a studio in my place, so we can send it around the world. So I invite you to help us with spreading positivity and love for the earth around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. That is a real good suggestion for us all. Eh? So thank you both online resource persons. I think now we switch to the live session, and maybe I ask Neshan to call the 6 authors. He himself is also an author, so as a moderator he can also bring his message to the forefront, but call the 6 authors to sit.
Thank you very much, Hans, and may I ask you also to join us up front.
We should move a little bit. those chairs kind of fall down the side. Okay. That's right. That was enough.
Ayubowan, Wanakkam, Assalamu alaikum, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What a great honor. First and foremost, thank you for the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand for hosting the Earth Trusteeship working group at a historic occasion where the first book on Earth Trusteeship, titled Reflections on Earth Trusteeship, is coming out as we speak. And on the dais, we have some of the most distinguished authors of this publication. And I wish to briefly set out the sections of this publication and then introduce the speakers and thereafter call upon them to share insights on what they have brought out in this book. The publication is a novelty in itself. It's not a pure academic nor a social activism publication. It's a combination of law, the sciences, the environment, and the convergence of movements, of whether it be human rights or international law, as well as the climate and the climate sciences, which are critical for the issues facing us. The book, after an introduction, goes through poetry and imagination with wonderful art, including from Justin Sobion, who is one of the co-editors, then analysis, the principles of Earth Trusteeship, then affirmative action, and then wider possibilities through researched articles by a number of respected authors. On the speakers list, I will introduce everybody first and then call on you to speak. First, we have Professor Klaus Bosselmann, who's from New Zealand, the Ecological Law and Governance Association, chair of the Earth Trusteeship Initiative. He has authored and edited over 30 books on international law and political ecology, and he is a well-deserved recipient of the 2021 Karlovitz Sustainability Award. Then we have Maja Groff from the Netherlands and Canada. Ms. Groff is an international lawyer based at the Hague Academy of International Law. She has worked on existing and potential global treaties addressing areas of child law, issues of disproportionately affecting women, persons with disabilities, access to legal information, and range of other topics. And she is also been on the pioneering International Hague Network of Judges and the convener of the Climate Governance Commission. Mr. Michel Bauwens, Thailand, Belgium, is a theorist in emerging field of peer-to-peer collaboration, writer and conference speaker in the subjects of commons movement, technology, culture, and business innovation. Mr. Bauwens founded the P2P Foundation, a global organization of researchers working in open collaboration on the exploration of peer production, governance, and property. We have also on the dais Justin Sobion from New Zealand and Trinidad and Tobago. He's an attorney at law specializing in international law from the University of Cape Town, South Africa, and was admitted to the bar in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the year 2002, and later the barrister at law and solicitor in the Commonwealth of Dominica in 2008. His experience in international law include environmental law, human rights, constitutional law, and international law of the sea. He's currently teaching and assisting and also currently completing his PhD on the thesis of Earth Trusteeship at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Mr. Alyn Ware, Czechia, New Zealand. He's an educator and also a Livelihood Laureate for his wonderful work on peace and disarmament, a campaigner in the areas of nonviolence, peace, nuclear abolition, international law, human rights, and the environment. Born in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Aotearoa being the indigenous name of New Zealand, and currently living in Prague. His main roles are coordinator of the Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, director of the Basel Peace Office, coordinator of the World Future Council Peace and Disarmament Program, and the international representative for the New Zealand Peace Foundation. Hans van Willenswaard needs no introduction here, but he's been one of the powerhouses along with Wallapa who's made this publication possible, along with the INI network. Hans was born in the Netherlands and was educated as a cultural worker in the 60s at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Been active youth culture community developer, which continues to date. After he was trained in rural development and community farming at Emerson College, UK, initiated a development studies program at Zeeland University of Applied Sciences and did freelance work for IFORM and NGOs. He later met Ajahn Sulak Srivastava in the Netherlands and moved to shop in the old part of Bangkok. Finally, but least, I'm Neshan Gunesekera, with the honor of being the compeer today. I'm co-chair along with Dasho Karma Ura, who founded the Gross National Happiness Institute of Bhutan as co-chairs of the Earth Trusteeship Working Group. To set the kind of the context for this evening and this book, may I kindly call upon Professor Bosselmann, who's done an incredible amount of work on Earth Trusteeship and principles and environment law within the multilateral system and governance, to give us an overview of the journey we've had so far.
Yeah, thank you, Neshan. Good evening. Yeah, as Neshan pointed out, my commitment, my life career is to do with environmental law and international environmental law, which implies an inherent tension between what we ought to be doing, and we as members of civil society, as people, have very strong views on what social justice is and what ecological justice is, on the one hand side, but you're also dealing with governments. And somewhere between what we want and what governments or corporate powers, for that matter, want, we have to find a sort of pathway that we're ultimately agreeing on the very foundational principles of life that we all depend on. And what I'll suggest I will do very briefly, picking up on the title of the book, Reflections on the Earth Trusteeship. Earth Trusteeship is maybe a new term, has been around maybe just only 5 years, roughly. I haven't researched that. But the idea is, of course, a much older one. You can go to all cultures, right? The idea that you have to look after the land that you are part of and after the environment. So that's part and parcel of the human heritage, so to speak. But in more modern times, and I like to mention the fact 50 years ago, let's say 50 years ago, we started seriously thinking about our current predicament. That's pretty much a magic year. 1972, 3 events happened that were very defining for many, many decades to come. Number one, the first photo of planet Earth, the famous photo that an Apollo mission took from the beautiful planet Earth called the marble. So first time, you guys, you grew up, young people, right? You know exactly what I'm talking about. For older people like me, it was mind-boggling. We see all of a sudden this very vulnerable, most beautiful, stunning piece of planet called Earth, our home. Number one. Number two, it was the same year when the Club of Rome wrote a very influential book, The Limit of Growth. The Limit to Growth, right? Saying, and ever since we're struggling with this, there is no permanent growth in a limited world, a limited space. And the third event was actually trying to reflect on these things. It was the first time that the United Nations called for an international conference on the environment and development, basically asking the simple question: how do humans fit into the bigger global environment? What are we doing to it? And so there was the beginning of the environmental age, if you like. Now, the first summit then was based on a report that was called, the rather clumsy name, United Nations Commission on Development and Environment, known as the Brundtland Commission. It was the first time that ministers of the environment of all, or no, ministers, you know, of all sorts of portfolios of UN member states got together and tried to figure out what our task is ahead. The outcome was the famous Brundtland report that you might have heard about, defining the idea of sustainable development, all the rest of it. But critically, the Brundtland report did 2 things. In its introduction, it says, the very fact that we are able now to see our blue planet as a single entity will probably have a more profound effect on the future of humanity and our opportunities to learn than the famous Copernican turnaround, right? Where it was discovered that, you know, the Earth is not in the center of the universe. This was a UN report. And of course, the reference point for international environmental law. It also said, it called on states to start negotiating a charter to define how we can protect our home, how we can adjust our human development to the needs of the ecological system called planet Earth. This was a call for an Earth Charter. The US and stuff decided, oh, let's talk about it and let's have a summit. So the summit took place in Rio in 1992. And that's, of course, the first Earth Summit, and all the major international conventions were sort of starting their climate change and all that. But what's forgotten by governments, and that's sort of part of my experience, that there is a lack of appreciation of the work that has been done in the past. There's a lack of collective memory. But I would continue to remind governments until today that there was agreement back then in 1992 to oblige all states, I'm literally quotation under international law, to cooperate in order to protect the integrity of Earth ecological system. There you have it. The integrity of Earth ecological system. Again, Earth as a system. They knew what they were doing. There were scientists there, they were advising the text, and government signed up to it. And yet, well, they repeated this commitment to cooperate in order to protect the integrity of the Earth ecological system has never translated to an enforceable legal obligation. That's where the law comes in. Now, the next step was, since governments were not prepared to accept a fundamental legal duty under international law, until today we don't have it. Imagine that. Sovereign states are sovereign enough to basically say, oh, whether we protect the environment or not is up to us. I'm sovereign, right? This is bizarre, isn't it? I mean, our understanding of what the right thing is far more advanced than the kind of complication we see at government level. Mind you, many government officials are personally very nice people, but they may not be realizing of the kind of negligence or overlooking or worse they are part of. So our job as civil society, and I come to Earth Trusteeship here, is to remind them. So what we did as civil society, we drafted the Earth Charter that states were asked by the United Nations to do themselves. So we helped them. I was lucky enough to be in the drafting committee, and our understanding was always we complete unfinished business. We have a mandate from the UN to draft an Earth Charter. And we were led by Morris Strong, Mikhail Gorbachev, and wonderful people who inspired us back in the early 1990s, and then, of course, was adopted in 2000 in the Peace Palace in The Hague. The Earth Charter has a very simple message. We are all part of the community of life, all human beings, not part of the community of human life, that's true also, but of life. Automatically attacking the dominant Western worldview that the environment has a sort of utilitarian function for us. This is the Earth Charter, representing the consensus of all cultures, all religions, of people, all society has spoken. What is it? And the key message of the Earth Charter is we are all part of a community of life, therefore we have rights and responsibilities and obligations. And all the strong supporter of the Earth Charter still is our IUCN, the International Union Conservation Nature, the largest environmental organization where 90 states are members of. They are committed to the Earth Charter, but they are not doing enough. But I want to make the point that we are continuing this unfinished business, as far as I'm concerned. Earth Trusteeship thinking came about through an effort to articulate more clearly what we mean by the Earth Charter as an ethical framework for global governance. That took a few years to then relate human rights to responsibilities that we have for each other, and collectively, individually, we have responsibilities for the Earth. Eventually, we adopted the Hague Principles, and on the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, on the 10th December in 2017, was it 17, 18? 18, it must be 18. 70 years Universal Declaration of Human Rights, also the same place where the Earth Charter was adopted in the year 2000. So the Hague Principles were officially then basically summarizing, articulating very clearly what states should have done 30, 40 years ago. And we're calling the Earth Principles to guide, we're calling upon the United Nations to be guided by the Hague Principles in order to promote a universal declaration of things, but human responsibilities are complementary to it, and altogether we have trusteeship responsibilities. So the Hague Principles were then behind the current Earth Trusteeship initiative, and this beautiful book that had nothing to do with, just these wonderful people here, is articulating, and I think from the glance, I haven't fully read it, but I articulate in the most comprehensive and beautiful way what the Earth Charter and civil society always has trying to say, right? In some ways, it's straightforward. States have a legal obligation to protect the global environment, and not just, since we are also in communication with the United Nations and they're run by big, powerful states, so we have a long, long way to go. I'm not naive enough to believe that the famous UN Trusteeship Council that is currently not operating anymore, had a different function, should one day be a UN Earth Trusteeship Council. It should be, of course, but it will be a long way. We have to be realistic. Raul Montenegro talked about this, current power structures. I suggest this is one side of the story, and then I'm finishing, is to realize the kind of power structures that are at play at the moment, and we are fully aware of them, right? You don't have to be left. The power of us, human beings, we are in charge. We even, we are even in charge in terms of defining what the law should be and what the state should be like. The state, the sovereign state, has been invented in Netherlands. Netherlands features very prominently in all these kind of things, right? Has the Thessalian Peace and Hugo Grotius and so on. But it is ultimately our instrument. We as human beings, we as citizens, right? We have for some reason decided, let's assume it was us, the practice is a bit different, but in principle, yes, we need governments that act on our behalf. That's fine. We are trusting governments, right, to have our best interests in mind. And now we are saying our best interest is to preserve the integrity of the Earth as a system.
That's right.
Mystic and now able to articulate as global society, we have obviously more in common than separate. Of course, I don't have to tell you about this, that we as human beings are very much the same. But, that this is it could be a historical step towards the acknowledgement of the evolvement, that there are fundamental duties that we all have to discharge of. We all are trustees of the Earth, but we also want our institutions and political institutions, United Nations, I want this to be on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bosselmann. Thank you for painting the picture for the last 75 years and what's been achieved and what's been the challenges.
75 years.
And now we have that backdrop of the principles from the Earth Charter, the Hague Principles of 2018, moving the conversation into the analysis. And here, Ms. Groff gives quite a deep assessment of the governance innovations to protect our planet, observations from the work of the Climate Governance Commission. Ms. Groff.
Okay, now I think it's on. Great. Lovely. Wonderful to be here with everybody. Truly a pleasure. So first, a big thanks to the editors, Justin and Hans, and to all of the authors. And I think the concept of Earth Trusteeship is one of these timely concepts, ideas whose time has come, that is absolutely vital at this crossroads in international history, in fact, which I'll say more about in a moment. So I'll just share very briefly in my remarks this evening a few perspectives from my vantage point as the convener of this Climate Governance Commission. And we are indeed looking forward to the future. What do we need to do together, collectively, to safeguard our common prosperity, well-being, to live in a new way where we fully embody this idea of Earth Trusteeship? So the Climate Governance Commission, we started with a first strategy meeting in 2019, late 2019, in Seoul. So in the Asian region at Ban Ki-moon's Global Green Growth Institute. So we had an international strategy meeting. And then for several years, we mobilized expertise from around the world. We're working with experts, scholars, policymakers from all corners, all regions. We have close partners in Brazil, in India, Africa, the World Resource Institute, in the MENA region, Europe, North America. So we're trying to put our heads together to really think creatively, think fast, mobilize all of the human knowledge we currently have at our disposal. How can we look at our climate governance with fresh eyes, fresh perspectives, on trajectory, very unfortunately, for catastrophic climate change? Climate Action Tracker, according to current policies and target in the Paris Agreement. And we know also that 1.5 degrees, we've heard, is really a hard limit. The scientists are telling us that is. So we have huge challenges in front of us. And in our interim report of the Climate Governance Commission, we identified 3 climate action gaps. First, we have solutions. With existing technology, we have solutions to transition to clean energy sustainably, to meet in time, and there's not learning amongst countries, policy and information solution sharing. And then last, very importantly, and this was one of the key parts of the mandate of the Climate Governance Commission, when they're up in space, it is a vital necessity that we all now have this overview effect to look at the planet as one latest science. So climate, there's a number of others, one linked with biodiversity loss, among other things, novel entities, which is a chemical and other, and the planetary boundaries were only identified scientifically in 2009. So we need to really think creatively and quickly. How do we manage together this whole Earth system to keep humanity in a safe operating space to prevent the very calamitous effects of runaway climate change, but other very punishing, the UN. He's called the current time is the biggest challenge since World War II for the international community. He's called the scientific IPCC reports a code red to humanity. And philosophers like Toby Ord have talked about this time in human history as a precipice. We have tremendous potential as a species. We're relatively young in our life of being the authors of our own demise and actually spoiling our chances to thrive and prosper for countless generations to come. Good news in this very dire and scary problem set that we're now facing is that, as we found at the Climate Governance Commission, there are many options that we have to improve our collective international governance. Klaus mentioned, the lack of international rule of law. We have for governing ecological problems. We could establish, for example, in the policy field, an accelerated international policy hub for sharing and collaboration amongst countries. We had another proposal in the Commission for a distributed renewable energy platform that has now been taken up by this recent high-level advisory board to the Secretary General. Changes like a global environment agency, and also UN Charter reform, which are badly needed and overdue. So we have a whole suite of options, which we also, as an international community, have the capacity to actually deploy. We just need the imagination, the vision, and the leadership to help us look at this next generation governance in our collective common good. And the Climate Governance Commission is working with a number of former heads of state, 3 members of the Elders founded by Nelson Mandela, so Mary Robinson, first female president of Ireland, former president of Mexico, of Liberia, along with youth activists and climate. So we're trying to help spread these key ideas that we really need to get through this very difficult society and where we need to move next. And I hope we can find ways to bring it not just to policymakers around the world, but also to populations around the world.
To global level include and a theoretical framework which is very important as human institutions set up. On this, the co-editor of the book, Mr. Justin Sobion, Earth Trusteeship, a theoretical framework waiting to be unraveled. Over to you, Mr. Sobion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Neshan. Thank you for all, of course, the speakers who went before me and the speakers who are to come after, and friends and colleagues. It's my first time in Bangkok. I came with my wife. It's not her first time. But we are very pleased to be here to introduce this book. And if I may, I would like to just, before I get into the gist of my own article, I just wanted to speak as a co-editor. This book is the first substantive book on Earth Trusteeship. Of course, as we say that, we cannot forget those who came before and who laid the foundation. We spoke about that today. All the environmental activists, indigenous persons, indigenous people, the Earth Charter, Professor Bosselmann spoke about that. They paved the way for Earth Trusteeship. But I would also like to thank my other half, the co-editor, which is Hans. This is something that we spoke about as a group, the Earth Trusteeship Working Group. I see Hans running away, but anyway, I'll be able to engage with him more as he returns. But we have been speaking about this book to see that we have made it a reality. We went through pandemics. We had a number of Zoom talks about how we're making progress. So I'm very proud to be here to actually see that we have achieved what we set out to, but the work is yet to be done. Having a book, it's all to a broad spectrum of persons. We're talking about scholars, students, policymakers, politicians, civil society. Notice I stress politicians because we live in a world where we need, in a sense, the states and state organizations and state apparatuses to push forward certain agendas. So yes, civil society is, of course, extremely important, but our goal is how can civil society work in tandem with states to achieve Earth Trusteeship? And that is what it is about. Earth Trusteeship, if you look into the Hague Principles, Earth Trusteeship speaks about citizens working together with the states in tandem, jointly, as trustees or caretakers, however you wish to call it, guardians for the earth. So how can we put this or get this message across? We had an Earth Trusteeship education declaration, for example. Earth Trusteeship should be taught in schools, and this was one of the motivations behind this book as well. How can we get students to learn more about Earth Trusteeship? Because the students are, at the end of the day, are going to be the ones who may be future prime ministers, presidents, or maybe UN Secretary General. So we want to plant the seed. This is where the seed has been planted. This is the building block. This is the framework that we have set, of course, as we said, guided by I would like to call them the elders, because they're more older and experienced than me. The little gray hair don't get fooled. I would still like to consider myself young, but we think that we need we have laid the foundation. And the UN, why we want to unravel the mystery is that we dialogue with Earth Trusteeship at the level of the United Nations. That is, I won't want to call it a dilemma, but that is a serious question we have to pose, right? And we hope by planting this seed that there would be someone here as students, young persons in Thailand, someone here would be able to pick this up and be able to move forward in this international law agenda. I also like to touch upon the International Court of Justice advisory opinion on climate change. I know some of my colleagues may touch upon it, which was initiated, well, it was initiated by Vanuatu, of course, with a bit of, how should I say, urge by Pacific Island students. So the youth, again, being involved in this process. I would like to see Earth Trusteeship featured, for example, in my lifetime at least. Maybe it may not happen in this case, but I'm still optimistic. I would like to hear the International Court of Justice speaking about Earth Trusteeship and its relevance for the future generations and holding the earth in trust for future generations. ICJO advisory opinion is non-binding, but we have discussed this with some of our colleagues. It does carry a lot of weight. If an international law judge says that we agree on trusteeship principles, and we have seen that before with Justice Ware-Mantri, he mentioned in the case with Hungary and Czechoslovakia, he mentioned trusteeship of earth resources 3 times in his judgment. Right? And this wasn't even born yet, 1997, right? Anybody here who was born after 1997? Anybody? Neshan, right? So we have been speaking about trusteeship. Well, when I say we collectively, but we have International Court of Justice judges speaking about trusteeship, right? So these are the type of issues which I think are important for the book. And I would just like to get in one last message across. Earth Trusteeship, when you speak about the earth, people think environmental lawyers, environmental law, as I'm now writing my thesis and so on, my PhD thesis. It should we branch off into ecological law? That's another area. I mean, should we be eco-lawyers instead of environment? Because the environment is just one category, right? When you speak about the earth, you speak about the environment, you speak about climate, you speak about oceans, you speak about biodiversity. So the environment the earth is greater than the environment. That's what, the environment is a subset of the earth. So these type of issues, I think, just to keep in your mind, I wouldn't really want to delve into my article as much as I wanted to because of the first step. We still have a lot of steps to go. There's still a lot of work to be done. But my aim, my wish would be that 50 years from now, somebody would be able to quote from whoever article on this, will be able to quote that, listen, this was one of the, this was the building block, this was the cornerstone production. And it would be wonderful if a judge or even international lawyers would be able to cite this as, yes, I see you pointing to one of your, maybe if you become an advocate, you can cite one of our articles in this book, but that is what.
Mr. Sobion is also the artist. Thank you, Mr. Sobion. I also now would like to move to the action elements. And here I have had the wonderful pleasure over the last decades working alongside Mr. Ware, who's an inspiration. Alyn, your insights on save the planet, protect the future, no excuses for inaction, 8 policy initiatives to advance Earth Trusteeship through governments and the United Nations. Mr. Ware.
Oh, thank you very much, tribute on this topic. I'm very happy as an activist to be engaged in this initiative, and I hope that some of the background I've had as an activist been undertaken by a number of members of the World Future Council. Neshan and I are both on the World Future Council, in cooperation with about 60 Right Livelihood laureates. The Right Livelihood Award is sometimes called the Alternative Nobel Peace Prize because it was set up with one of the descendants of Alfred Nobel and a visionary, Jacob von Uexküll, who said, you know, we really need a Nobel Prize that is dealing with environment and human rights and is really enabling and supporting the activists who are leading the charge on this. And they went to the Nobel Committee to put this forward. The Nobel Committee said, well, it wasn't in Alfred Nobel's will, so we can't really do it. So this was set up independently. And the laureates, you may know some of them, like Greta Thunberg, for example, is one who is one of the signatories of this endorsement. But they are those who have been leading active change on these particular issues. So that's why, in my mind, this isn't a book that's just about thinking. It's not just about proposals. It's been picked up by activists to say, how are we going to take this forward? And in which forums and which ways are we doing it? And the particular appeal that we included from the World Future Council members and the Right Livelihood laureates was called Save the Planet, Protect the Future, No Excuses for Inaction. And it was looking at action primarily by, or that corporations have a responsibility to adhere to human rights and environmental principles, or other actors. But the principal ones are the governments and the United Nations little places. And that's what we need. I mean, they're indicating. So in this appeal, there are a lot of initiatives, of course. We sort of condensed them down to about 8. I'm not going to talk about, I'll just talk about 2 of them to protect the Earth for future generations. And there are a range of ways of doing this through the human rights bodies, for example, particularly since General Comment 36 from 2018, where the UN Human Rights Committee affirmed that environmental degradation and climate change is a violation of the right to take. But the one I'm going to pick up on is the one that Justin mentioned, which is the International Court of Justice, because this one is very powerful. The International Court of Justice is a principal organ of the United Nations. So every member nation that joins the United Nations, they adhere to the UN Charter of the court. The problem with the court, though, of course, is that governments, when they joined the United Nations, weren't prepared to give up their sovereignty over these issues and accept that the decisions from the International Court of Justice would be binding on everybody. So they've sort of like, they said, well, you can volunteer to accept the jurisdiction of the court. And 73 countries have done that. But that doesn't mean that the advisory opinion doesn't have legal. What they just can't do is tell states what they have to do about it. They can only make recommendations. But so what this is this opinion which is now going to be developed by the International Court of Justice, the issue of climate change to the International Court of Justice in order to determine what are the legal responsibilities to protect future. It's about the law, it's about the facts. It's about what is the situation with regard to the climate. And it will have an independent analysis based on the scientific evidence. Basically, there's a little thing that should be done, be responsible for implementing this. I'm saying all this because we don't hear about this much in the media. You don't hear very much about the way the International Court of Justice works. You don't hear very much about the fact that there have been some incredible cases that have been taken to the International Court of Justice. Contentious cases between states and advisory opinions. I was very much involved in the advisory opinion on nuclear weapons, which we took to the court back in 1994. The decision was given in 1996, and it moved use of nuclear weapons and illegal. It may be that the fact that we haven't had nuclear weapons used again in wartime since 1945 is partly to do with a taboo, political taboo, and partly to do with the law that's laid down by the International Court of Justice in 96. And as you've seen this whole Russia-Ukraine situation play out, and Putin's been coming forward with threats to use nuclear weapons, you've often heard then, sort of a day or two later, the foreign minister saying, well, actually, the policy of Russia is only to use nuclear weapons or threaten to use nuclear weapons when the very survival of Russia is at stake. which is exactly the determination that was made by the International Court of Justice. So you see, even a country like Russia, which is violating international law in some respects, is also paying attention to international law with regards to this issue of something which could be threatening the survival of humanity. If you think that the DNB gives strength to the development of to environmental governance mechanisms, whether it's a global environment agency, which is one of the proposals, it could be a stimulus to get that established, or to repurposing the UN Trusteeship Council in order to provide governance over the global commons. These are, which some of the future, I'm confident there's going to be deliberations and discussions on these governance mechanisms, on whether a global environment agency or repurposing of the Trusteeship Council. And in terms of actually repurposing the trusteeship, one can establish new global governance mechanisms without having to amend the Charter. And I've been involved in one that was established, Program Direct, that concluded the Rome Statute to establish the International Criminal Court. So it came from civil society. It was a civil society push. And that is an example of a global governance mechanism that has been established. So I'm probably a little bit more optimistic than some of my colleagues in thinking that it's possible. I have seen change happen in my own country, Aotearoa, New Zealand, which used to be a very militaristic country. It got involved in virtually every war it could, and then it changed in the 1980s when we realised that, if you keep going on basing your security on a military basis, with our consciousness, and now everyone in New Zealand is totally supportive of us being nuclear free. We ban nuclear weapons, and we only engage in common security approaches to these international issues, resolving them through the use of the International Court of Justice, through the mediation service of the UN Secretary General, through other regional bodies. We have the Pacific Islands Forum in the Pacific, which is one. In Europe, there's the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. So these governance mechanisms are not just about environmental governance, it's also governments to ensure that we move away from the threat or use of force and to abolish war. So we're also engaged in that. It's not so much written here, but I think we're going to come out a book soon about abolition of war and how it's possible through global governance by 2045,
Yeah.
the 100th anniversary of the United Nations. So thank you very much, and do read the book and do take action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. Fascinating exponent of what activism can actually look like in one's lifetime. The book also transcends, in indigenous terms, the past, present, and the future. And as we weave things together, we move to the article sections with a number of authors co-authoring and bringing together ideas that we can continue to weave this beautiful nest that we're putting together. So here I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Michel Bauwens, who together with Jose Ramos and Mesam Daudul wrote the article titled Placing the Commons in a Temporal Framework, the Commons as a Planetary Regeneration Mechanism. Mr. Bauwens, over to you.
Yes, yeah, I can see you can hear me. Thank you. I just want to mention I've been living for 20 years in Thailand, so very happy and proud to be here. And my son is studying in Chula, so that's another connection, right? So my article is probably like the longest in terms of time scale. It's something is called Big History. It's an official discipline. And so basically what I tried to do was to place the commons, because we talk about the commons here, and I'm not sure that everybody actually realizes what that means, right? So most of us, especially in the West, but actually nowadays everywhere, we think that there are two institutions, markets and states. And we read history, especially the last 200-300 years, as a perpetual conflict between people who think we need more state and people who think we need more market. That's a very good way to summarize the last 200 years of political history. And if you know Karl Polanyi, he called it the lib-lab. So there's a cycle where basically there's a big crisis that's good for the workers. So there's all kinds of compromises being made, the welfare state and stuff like that. And then you go in the liberal phase, and the market becomes more and more pretty much something called the Kondratev cycle. It takes about 50, 60 years. And if you look at the history, 1871, 1929, 2008, you can see it's still quite operative. But there's a third institution that we did our best to destroy in the West, the commons. So what are the commons? It's not private property. So manage and care the territory and the people who live on it and compete with other countries. So public property, it's not that. It's common property that are generated, protected, and ruled by communities. So for example, if you look at the Google Earth, you will see that Switzerland, Austria, and Japan are very green. And you can ask yourself, why is that? Why aren't they burning the forests in these countries? And it's basically because the mountain flanks in these countries are managed as commons. So it's the villages of these mountain villages in Switzerland and Austria and Japan that are deciding the rules that they use to exploit the mountains. So, you can only get nuts in January and February, you can only do this in March. So they have these rules that they collectively, so that's what the commons is. And I have a theory, which I think is to have an assessment available, everything shrinks. There's a study called HANDY, Human and Nature Dynamics, and they trace back this cycle way, way back, even before the imperial, 5,000 years ago. This is a very old cycle. And so what we notice is that in ascending cycle, parts of the cycle, the extractive institutions that are market and state grow and become more important, but that they reach this kind of peak, and then they can less and less take care of the people and the economy with markets and states. And then as it goes down, and we are in a down cycle nowadays, then you see that there is a counter-reaction to, and I was asked by the mayor to map and analyze the commons in Ghent. There were 50 in 2008 and 500 in 2016. So a tenfold growth. You may not notice it, and maybe it's not calculated, but Catalonia, the Flanders, Colombia, I've seen studies. This is happening globally since 2008. Okay, so we are now in a period where the commons are coming back. And then, of course, we have a question of scale that we need to discuss, right? What has happened in the last 30, 40 years? Civilization is essentially a relationship between the city and the countryside. So you need to generate a surplus, physical relationship, and a class relationship and everything else between farming and cities. But what we invented about in 93, for me is a big date, is massive non-territorial coordination, right? What is the internet really about? The internet institutes global peer-to-peer connections between people seeking affinity-based relations and doing projects together on a global scale. Think about the open source software. Google, Amazon, Yahoo, they would not exist without using a massive amount of servers that are managed by open source software, which has been created by global communities working together on a global scale and coordinating in a good sense. So basically in the West, we started destroying the commons in the 16th century, and this is called the enclosures. Basically, the nature of property changed from a feudal property, which is a relation of duties and rights. So the lord has to take care of his children, the serfs, to a situation of absolute property. I can do what I want with my land, and if I can make more money with sheep than with people, then I chase the people away, right? So the enclosures is the period that started in the 16th century where massively the farmers are chased away from their lands, in England first, in Scotland, and then they come to the cities, and capitalism is kind of the result of this. And so then we get the growth of international states, the Westphalian system as we call it here, and transnational finance, right? So it means that globalization has institutionally taken place through the two extractive institutions. And whereas the government, the state would intervene and do something else, this is impossible today, right? If you elect such a government today, probably within 100 days it would be at a national level, right? So here is my argument. We need cosmo-local commons institutions. I call them magisteria of the commons. It's the missing institution. So my amendment to the Earth Trusteeship idea, which I support, is that yes, governments are responsible for the common good and the environment, but they cannot do it alone. We need civic institutions, trans-local civic institutions that can have a protection. This is something I experienced in Thailand. So let me just very quickly tell the anecdote. So I'm married to a Thai woman. I have Thai kids and everything. And I come and I'm the pay rent. I don't pay food. I don't pay anything. Okay, then I build a house, and I have 10 people coming to my house. All right? Family. Right? So I'm not helping you because you are helping me. I'm helping you because I know that if anybody else in the family has a problem, you will help them as well. So it's not a gift expecting a counter gift. I'm supporting a collective entity. So if you think that commons don't exist in Thailand, they do, and they're actually very strong, and they actually that we don't have in the West, and especially not in the US, where you're really in trouble if you lose your job and everything. Okay, so what is cosmolocalism? I think this is the new paradigm. So let me briefly explain it. Everything that's heavy is local. And everything that's light is global and shared. So you have to imagine a relocalization of the economy through distributed manufacturing, right? So we can do things entirely different now. So I don't know if you know Arrival. It's not a movie, the science fiction movie. It's actually a company that can make vans and buses locally. A city can order vans. Okay, I see I have to stop. And they just make it locally, right? This is what we mean by distributed manufacturing. We can now really marry both. But then the cooperation has to happen at a translocal level. So you make it locally, and we save three, right? So you're not going to do your little microfactoring and then operation where any innovation that happens anywhere in the network is available for anybody else in the network, right? So we move from economies of scale, which is what we're doing now, to economies of scope, doing more with less, sorry. So I have to stop, but I hope you're interested, and I don't live far away, so I'm
Thank you
open
very
to any
much, Mr.
discussion.
Bauwens. Raises a number of questions. Value system, which is based on the family at the basic unit in our society. Interesting insights. Thank you for those. We have now moved to the co-editor of this publication and one of the inspirations, Hans van Willenswaard, on his insights on his article, Earth Trusteeship.
It's has been and is a real pleasure to be co-editor, both to work with Justin, but also with all of you. We, at certain moment, we sent a message around who wants to help us to make this book. And we got a remarkable response. We have 23 authors who are willing pro bono to give their opinion and bring their opinions together in a context of what we look for are based in law and governance, but are also beyond it. And for me, start feeling that we are Earth trustees. Because I'm a layperson in this field, but when I heard, oh, there's a group who really wants to co-design global governance, I think, yeah, that's really needed. We have global problems, so we need also global governance. But like many countries, will be in the hands of authoritarian rulers who so we have to be very careful if we want to co-design global governance, how we are going to do that. And for me, the crucial step is that we can only have global governance, proper global governance, if we are global citizens. And as global citizens, we have to feel that we are Earth trustees. And this is not something which is given to us or where we need a paper, somebody signs you, you're an Earth trustee or so. No, that is a kind of birthright or birth duty or birth challenge. That it's something we, by definition, we are Earth trustees. And what does that mean? That I'm happy that now I'm speaking after Michel, because he made it very clear that both market thinking and state thinking as it is now, and state acting and market acting, is driven by self-interest. And that is something which gears up a kind of vicious circle which has brought me further. Now we are in war in our world again, and this distracts us completely from the real tasks which are ahead of us. Because it's so important that, and that is not also a new message. My article starts with a quote from U Thant. U Thant, the Burmese Secretary General of the UN. He said it's not only important what we think we can do in the world or for the world, but we have to realize, will there be a world to live in? We are at the edge of extinction. So feeling that you are, and I don't mean sentimental feeling, but I mean feeling in a sense of spiritual responsibility beyond self-interest. And that is also the story of the commons, and that is not only an ethical message or so, but something we can live together. That is also so nice to see in our project, Connecting the Commons, that and people connect and recognize each other as commoners, let's say, or I say global citizens. Then that dimension becomes stronger because we all have it. In principle, we are willing to work for other people, for our family system, that. Because it's not just in our awareness, but yes, it is very strongly hammered in us from the beginning, but it's in all institutions. So what we need is a real shift, a dialogue. We need strong meetings, strong opinions, even controversial opinions. I can say that I don't believe that the state completely immersed in their paradigm, which is historically grown and which is society as citizens, as global citizens. And then I agree completely with Michel, global local globalism or global localism, but I got it, the insight from this rooted in the citizenship, and local citizenship is very strongly linked, and national citizenship remains very important. Oh, it has the what do you call it, the power to, there's no role, no political role beyond national citizenship. I can nowhere go and say I'm a global citizen, what are my rights and responsibilities? That we have the United Nations, but it is also there, but it's not enough. And we have seen over history, after the First World War, there was an attempt to make the League of Nations, collapsed. Second World War was needed. Now we have the United Nations, and I pray, let's say, we don't need the challenging people only to go down, down, down. And so we have to cultivate together a strong image of eco-peace. Ecology is our common aim, and that is what we have to work together for. And so Earth Trusteeship is a kind of foundation stone for eco-peace.
Thank you very much, Mr. Willenswaard, for those comments. Been privileged to do under late Judge Christopher Veeramantri, who was referred to several times by those distinguished speakers. He was a former vice president of the International Court of Justice who illuminated the International Court of Justice with the richness of religions, traditions, cultures, and indigenous systems, and brought it within the system of international law. Now, saying this, I happen to be the director of a center that he set up in Sri Lanka. And as some of you may know, Sri Lanka has had a bloody, violent war for almost 3 decades, which came to an end in May 2009. So we started and from different cultural backgrounds. And the focus was on our relationship with Earth, using environment as the common denominator for peace building. And we did this for 3 years, and I was very proud to be part of this. And then 3 years later, at the 30th anniversary of the Livelihood Foundation, which happened in Bonn, I got the great privilege of presenting some of the findings of this wonderful work we did. And one of the listeners to this was late Professor Hans, the last century, a top nuclear physicist who fought against nuclear energy, nuclear bombs, from wonderful idea, these trustees. But answer one question. Where is the ship heading? So then I get stuck as a lawyer. Now, how do I answer this question? And that answer is still pending. And as Hans mentioned, dialogue is key, is absolute, which is not, and we need to engage in dialogue. And that is important. And I believe this book and its essential message that this is the beginning of another journey, which will transcend several lifetimes. And it is important that we have this conversation in a serious note. So with that,
Aren't we going to get questions? Or?
yes, and then it opens up the questions for the audience. And we have 2 mics. Sorry.
I can very quickly, 25 seconds.
Sure.
2 comments just sparked by some of my co-panelists. One in terms of, a system was outlawed to avoid. So this has not been implemented, however, and the charter was supposed to be reformed within 10 years by 1955, and it wasn't because of issues. So I just want to refer you to a 2020 book that I wrote with 2 co-authors. We won an international prize in 2018 on a new comprehensive global governance system to manage existential risk. You know this. And then on the corporate world, I just wanted to say very briefly, yes, there has to be stronger accountability measures for the corporate world, national, international level also, but there is a growing, very inspiring movement of extremely progressive corporate leaders who are sometimes far ahead of governments or even some activists in terms of their ambition and their passion for interested.
Thank you very much, Maya. It's important. Right.
Just follow up from Maya. So the UN with other nations in peaceful ways, and it lays out a range of mechanisms that nations can use to do that. And so that includes negotiation, mediation, the use of the International Court of Justice to resolve disputes, the use of regional agencies. The problem is that nation states don't do that either. It's not just they sometimes ignore the prohibition of war, but they don't follow what they're required to do, which is the positive ways to resolve these conflicts. It may have been that we could have prevented the Russian invasion of Ukraine if we'd used more of those mechanisms, used the International Court of Justice to determine whether or not there was any justification in Russia's allegations that genocide was being conducted in Donbas region. Now that case has been taken to the court. It should have been taken to the court when those allegations first came up in 2016. The territorial dispute over Crimea. Russia's put forward their statement that, well, this was traditionally part of Russia, that it was given to Ukraine when Ukraine joined the Soviet Union. Well, here was a dispute, 2 different narratives. And that neither of them, neither Russia nor Ukraine, use the mechanisms that are available under the UN to resolve that dispute. So that's the other part of it. It's not just the prevention of war, it's using these mechanisms better. And there are really good examples of these mechanisms being used that have resolved disputes. So it's not just idealism. It's not saying, well, those mechanisms are not realistic. So that's the two parts of that coin, I think. And we need to encourage our governments to use those mechanisms. And one of those is to make sure that we get universal jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. 73 countries have accepted it so far, or is the use of those mechanisms in the UN. Thanks. Sorry, it was more than 25 seconds.
No, it's okay. It's a long clock. Okay. Open to the audience.
Okay, sure, I can start.
Yeah, please introduce yourself and then, yeah.
Okay, my name is Sati, and I came here with my colleagues, in Cambodia. I'm also well, as an international law student myself, I have a question, but at the ICJ, I understand that, okay, it's very significant, the advisory opinion, but why not also like other regional courts as well? And are there any other movements that might be significant in terms in the legal realm? Well, and just what we're doing with the Earth Trusteeship, yeah.
Shall we take a few questions and then come?
I'm Vivi, I'm trustee arena with children, because I think if we do that, I mean, it have to come up like you're born and like, oh yeah, I'm Thai, but also like global citizen as well. I think we need really variety of the medias, because I feel that we are a very niche group of people. I think maybe few 4 or 5 types.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the talk. Francisco Starmedi. I'm originally from Indonesia. I'm with the German Heinrich Böll Foundation. Maybe first a bit, thank you again for all 7 of you, but maybe with Mother Earth, Gaia, Terra Mater, Pachamama. This is, I think, what we forget about our Earth. Really, we are just souls wearing human dress, right? But this Westphalian concept, I need a passport to live here, I need visa, this kind of thing. And the setting about our humanity, we have such low awareness. Question to all, World War III, there is no nuclear war. What is the most priority? Because what I learned from tonight is that they are split in among of you talk about awareness, or we still open for dialogue just to make this low awareness souls wearing human dress understand, or we put the law on top. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we could. Yes, one more question. Yeah.
Couple.
And that will be the last, and we'll turn to the dice.
I just my feel local as one of need to respect our trustee on this world, this earth, but how to empowering the village or the local people. I strongly believe that local is a key driving force to change right now, but many causes are now, I don't know, it's just bring all our common sources and the community people.
Yep. Okay. Who would like? Sorry. Okay. Is it a follow-up to the question, or can we wait one more round? Okay.
Us from destroying ourselves. This is extreme, and we have seen the extremism at the time of First Cold War, where the authoritarian society is talking about, well, because the nature of human beings is such that they want a little bit more than the others. So I'm just thinking about the UN Sustainable Development Goal. To perform the basic life in that 17 crores. And if you look at that whole 17 crores, the 17 is actually the final goal of getting the people to become partners together to help solving the problem of the world and eventually not to commit suicide ourselves. In that event of 17, the 16 is the mean to the 17. 17 is partnership. Remember, we feel equal. We feel that we wanted to save the world together. We want to work together. But the 16 is all about going to as close to equality, as close to living together peacefully. May not be exactly the same. Some may be a little bit richer than the other. But whoever that is not too rich can have their so-called decent life. And that's what SDG 17 is all about. Isn't that maybe an alternative? I'll be talking to Maria on the 19th about this. Maria Lodicus.
Thank you very much. Can we have responses? First on the ICJ and other regional institutions. Yes?
Yeah, this straightforward question was whether we can see a development of replicating the international court at more regional levels. And of course, the example that comes to mind is the European Court of Justice and European Court of Human Rights. And my proposition would be Asian countries, you have ASEAN, right, as a sort of collaborative international law like the European Union is. It's an own person under international law. So I'm not commenting on the current miseries and, contradictions in the EU. I'm not selling the European Union as a model. But the idea behind is, of course, very valid. It is clearly the result of the collapse of civilization. Each time we saw the two massive disasters of the 20th century, and each time there was a moment in history where they tried to establish, new forms of collaboration to minimize or avoid any risk of further wars. The first effort with the League of Nations failed, but the UN Charter in 1945 was then initiating the unification of Europe, of course, and it was not possible without the leadership of certain people, right? France and and so on. The result is that people like me, I'm sort of German, right? And we just are totally used to the idea. If we don't win in our courts, we have sort of 3-4 layers. We go to Strasbourg. We go just to the European Court of Human Rights. And I'm very optimistic that say in Germany, we just won at the level of the Supreme Court. A very important climate case that you might have heard about in May 21. But it was basically said the German government is about to threaten the human rights of young people in particular. Come 2030, it will be clear that under the current legislation to protect the climate, it will not be reach the 2030 goal, and therefore it's already clear that the breach of human rights of especially young people. One is the government is sort of trying to revise and amend the climate legislation in Germany. At the same time, it goes now to the European Court of Human Rights, where it will be tested with European law, right? And of course, we are confident that we can win the case as well. Rights are pre-state law. So if there's anything to learn from sort of regional court, it needs to be a Supreme Court that tests any kind of misdoings and wrongdoings of governments against the leadership of certain states, Cambodia, maybe other countries coming together and sort of incrementally working towards a regional union. ASEAN is probably the only candidate, I don't know, at the moment. as these collaborations increase, then of course we have a gradual transfer of national sovereign power to the regional power. And then we have this regional court system. I mean, it's not a new idea, of course. It has been expressed since 1945 by so many organizations, so many thinkers, that we need a world of federations, really, that we are hopefully seeing a sort of merging of regional areas, Asia at large, and the Pacific Rim, Latin America, North America, and so forth, all sort of historically, I think, inspired by the European Union. I mean, let's not forget it in this day and age. It has been an amazing effort, an amazing achievement. If you live in Europe, there's a lot of good things to be said about, not because it's bloody capitalism and Western world and stuff. No, purely because your national passport doesn't matter anymore, right? But that's only my sort of humble take here. If that's you answering your question.
Yeah. Maja de Naden.
Because of entrepreneurship of lawyers and others. And even if a region doesn't have a court per se, I think there can be a lot of creative initiatives to bring things to the attention of governments or a regional organization like ASEAN. And youth can do a lot. Youth instigated this AO, this advisory opinion campaign, and got it through the General Assembly ultimately with collaborating with, do incredible things. I was just in, got single-use plastics banned in the state of Qatar. So anyways, there is such power in youth insight, campaigns, vision, and litigation network for the national litigation, which judges have found themselves quite predisposed for finding for human rights and future generations using existing law. And I can link you and others up with this international litigation network linking the national cases, which is also very exciting and youth-led very often.
Thank you. Alyn?
So just a quick follow-on from that. So Maja mentioned how important it is to have these cases at different levels, national level, regional level. The case at the international court go well, some go other ways, because there's also countersuits by corporations, talking about corporation rights and these things, and they'll win in some of those cases. The implementation of that is problematic unless you have those same legal obligations extended internationally, because you to hire, which means we would then be at a competitive disadvantage to our neighbours like us. So that of the global commons, if you only try and work with one good state and others aren't doing the same thing, it's really, really difficult to implement that. That's one of the key reasons why we need a decision at the international level that applies universally. So that will then help the implementation of these other cases. And the others we expect will too, because the decisions come down from the International Court of Justice now. So that's what makes this case a special one, really important, and why it's really good that it's come from youth. And it's the young students who said, look, this is a problem for the world. We need a solution that applies to the world. And so I encourage you to get really involved in the ICJ case, but it doesn't mean don't get involved in cases in your own country or in your region. They're also important. And the question of that is does this take away from education and dialogue? I say no. Law goes hand in hand with education, and it goes hand in hand with education. It's not going to work if people don't understand the importance of law and the role of law in society. Then you won't get that much implementation. So the education goes hand in hand. And the diplomacy also. I mean, the diplomacy is going to be necessary after the decision from the International Court of Justice, because the governments are going to have to implement this, and they'll also be negotiating. This will help feed into the COP process and make it more successful. There'll still be negotiations, the educative efforts, and helps the diplomatic efforts.
Thank you. Justin.
This century with respect to climate change, but there's also ITLOS Action, that's the International Tribunal for Law of the Sea. They have also submitted advisory opinion, well, the small island states on climate change and international law, coming from my region, the Caribbean, or also AOSIS states. These are Alliance for Small Island States, by Chile and Colombia, if I want to believe. They will commence also by, well, I think the Inter-American Court was more indigenous persons, indigenous people, but with justice. So the ICJ is just one. So we see we have 3 at least, and I think there actually may be more in the pipelines. Someone else raised with respect to the book itself,
Yes.
being more available for the general public, general readership. I've been speaking to a colleague from Thailand this morning in our meeting, speaking of maybe other languages within the region, Mandarin. Well, this is one of Hans introduced me to her in terms of she was working with the Commons. So this is something that could be possible, even if we do the introduction or summary of the book in a different language. So these are kind of options that we are also looking at.
Thank you. And very quickly to add, young people can also be inspired that old people are also taking climate action. Maya mentioned to the European Court of Human Rights. In fact, the first case that goes to Strasbourg was not necessarily young, but not necessarily very old, but a group of ladies who are pensioners who have taken this court to the highest court in the European Court of Human Rights. And this is something you should look at, which is fantastic. And that was unheard of maybe 10 years ago. But here, old, young, in between, everybody else is on the pave. I think it's about momentum. It's about convergence of movements, whether it be the climate litigation or human rights, children's movements and young people's movements, older persons' movements, all coming. If I'm not mistaken, whether the SDGs, specifically 16, is sufficient to... Sustainability is another alternative to take this conversation forward.
Can I just give a response on behalf of our network? We haven't really sort of specifically articulate our position, but the logic of Earth Trusteeship is, of course, that we are part of the community of the Earth community. So we need to be clear about the 17 SDGs, not only in the sense that they are all interrelated, and I agree with you that last, is the most important one, but on what basis? Now, we have to appreciate the SDGs have been sort of put together, civil society, but UN, but following the traditional sort of strict divide between economic goals, social goals, and environmental goals, right? The green ones, the blue ones, and then the red ones. So from our perspective, we need to get the most important thing on environmental goals, and this by implication, if we take, climate change as one of them, and biodiversity and so forth, they are all connected, but if we take them at the forefront of everything, then of course we are automatically calling for partnerships, we are automatically requiring the fulfillment of the other sort of 16, remaining 12 goals. And that priority, this has been developed by the planetary boundary movement, Earth system science, and so forth. And the point and the beauty of it is that we could say, poverty, yes, of course, but poverty is a result of not being able to focus on the fundamentals. The fundamental experience that we had in our networks, or my experience anyway, the Earth Charter movement and wherever we're trying to apply it regionally and locally, is, if we have a conversation about what we all have together, what we all have in common, that brings us together. And what, these wonderful commons movement. Can I just remind everybody what we are doing here? We are all children, so very with a securely and act locally. If I get my head in German language, Erde, the word Erde is identical. Erde is soil, and is also the word for the planet. And this is in the community where I live, Waiheke Island. There isn't anymore like, think globally. We don't need to be told, right? We just do it. Because whatever we do at home matters at global scale. And that's why this conversation that we are having here and through the wonderful work that I'm sure that many of you are doing automatically sort of mutually empowers us, right? Where you live, you have a job to do. And it just happens so that there are many, many people like us all around the world. And this has yet to be sort of understood by this SDG process, There is, if we focus on Mother Earth as the single most issue that we all have, I think then the SDGs have a chance to be met eventually. I have only only problem with one goal that refers to economic growth. I can't make sense of it.
Why should it be a goal to have more economic?
Crucial to the wonderful dice we've had and the audience. Thank you very much for everybody. Read a book. By congratulating all the authors, Pauline says, let us listen to Mother Nature. If we can hear the frogs croak, we must always keep the sound of these small creatures indigenous. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Wish you a good evening. See you tomorrow. I need to get everybody's autograph.
Anyway, the one will be the one without my signature. One in my
Everybody must be quiet to hold